Well, we find ourselves in Chicago.
Oh boy.
You know what we're doing in Chicago?
Visiting.
No, we're on a mission from God.
We are?
And we are on our way over to the Museum of Science and Industry,
That's a fun one.
which is at the old World's Fair site from 1893, which should be really, really awesome. Chicago has been awesome. We are definitely trying to get into the whole Chicago thing. We're dressing Chicago, yeah, and we've been eating hot dogs and pizza.
Oh boy.
And oddly, people have been staring at us, and it's like,
good for Chicago.
but we fit right in. I don't understand. Isn't this how they dress it? Anyway, we're heading over to the Museum of Science and Industry, so check this out. Chicago has always been known as America's second city, this in reference to its size. There's certainly nothing second class going on here. This building houses the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. It's in a building called the Palace of Fine Arts, which is the only surviving structure from an area that was dubbed White City. White City was built for the World's Fair of 1893. Back then, every 4 years or so, there was a World's Fair. A city would be picked to host the World's Fair, and that city would spare no expense putting on a massive, massive exposition. Chicago constructed White City, not just for the World's Fair, but the assumption was that it could be used to house other expositions after the fair. The fair was a huge, huge success. This was the hit of the fair. This was Ferris's Fabulous Wheel. It was dismantled after the fair and taken to the Paris World's Fair. The fair was a huge success, attracting millions of people. White City was constructed right on the shore of Lake Michigan, and it was positively huge. The only building that still survives is the Palace of Fine Arts right here, which today is the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. The main entrance is here, about 40 feet below ground level. Most of the museum is subterranean. You then ride escalators back up toward ground level. There are a ton of really fun, interactive experiences here. Some are a little on the goofy side. There was a Lego show going on when we were here. Always fun to see what these Lego guys managed to come up with. Here we see the Palace of Fine Arts constructed entirely out of Lego bricks. How cool is that? They also brought in a few artifacts from the 1893 World's Fair. One of the most interesting artifacts in the Museum of Science and Industry is captured German U-boat 505. 505 is a Class 9C German U-boat that was captured in World War II after it sunk 8 Allied vessels. As it's very, very crowded inside, it requires making pre-arrangements and paying extra fees in order to get inside the submarine. Not everyone gets to come in here. The submarine was captured in 1944 during the war and then taken to Bermuda under high levels of secrecy. The crew was not allowed to contact the Red Cross or their families. No one knew if they were alive or dead. But the Allies didn't want anyone to know that they had this boat. As it happens, being captured probably saved the lives of the crew, since 70% of submariners died during the war. But these guys all survived. In 1954, the submarine was sailed through the Great Lakes to Chicago. On the shores of Lake Michigan, a marine railway was built that crossed Lake Shore Drive, much to the chagrin of the passing commuters, and it was parked on the lawn there at the Museum of Science and Industry. Just over 50 years later, the submarine was really falling apart, and so it was decided to spend $37 million to build a subterranean display room about the same size as a football field, where the submarine currently resides inside the Museum of Science and Industry. Another really cool display here is Old Bend number 17. This is a coal mine that was playing out in southern Illinois in 1933, and the museum simply bought it, hired the entire mining crew, and said, "Move it to the Museum of Science and Industry." They proceeded to dismantle all of the equipment, cut slabs out of the sides of the coal seam to use as walls down here, and then reassembled the whole thing on the lowest level in the Museum of Science and Industry, putting the head frame on the highest level. The cage lowers people from the upper level, and through a little bit of chicanery and trickery, making them think they've gone down 400 feet instead of about 40 feet to the lower level, where they experience the entire coal mine and even ride on the rail vehicles down here. The mining crew even stayed on for decades, acting as the original tour guides. Needless to say, none of them are still with the exhibit, and a whole new group of tour givers is giving tours down here. And there are trains here. This is New York Central and Hudson number 999, the Empire State Express. The locomotive was originally built with massive 86-inch diameter drivers, allowing it to achieve very high speeds. Those were later removed and replaced with 72-inch diameter drivers. In 1893, en route to the World's Fair, pulling a passenger train of regular paying passengers, it achieved 112 miles an hour, besting the world speed record for a locomotive and train. It was, in fact, the first transportation device of any kind to achieve greater than 100 miles per hour. It was displayed at the World's Fair and subsequently at the World's Fair of 1933, as well as other rail fairs. Here's a fun thing. This is a mold-orama from the early 1960s. Those are made in Chicago, and it's been sitting here all that time, making little castings of number 999. The locomotive was made part of the permanent collection here in 1962. This is a replica of Stephenson's rocket, often credited as being the world's first locomotive in 1829. Actually, the very first locomotive was built in 1796. Stephenson's rocket was built later and was one of the first locomotives to actually be able to move down a track under its own power and even pull a car or two. It was built to take part in a competition by the Liverpool and Manchester Railroad as they were trying to find an adequate locomotive for their railway to replace horses, and they offered a cash prize for any locomotive that could achieve certain goals, and Stephenson's rocket won. This replica is one of two that were constructed by Stephenson himself and shipped to America, one for the Ford Museum and one to come to the Chicago Rail Fair. This beauty is the Burlington Zephyr. In the 1930s, a lot of the railroads started building streamlined diesel passenger trains to attract the public and gain a lot of notoriety. This one was built for the World's Fair of 1933, held here at the fair site. But I think the coolest thing here at the Museum of Science and Industry is Chicago itself. No, not the real Chicago, this Chicago. This is an HO scale model of Chicago. It's massive. In fact, it's one of the world's largest model railroads. Naturally, it features a working example of the L going around the downtown area, but it also has many, many passenger and freight trains moving around the outside of the exhibit on a 4-track main. It also has residential areas on the outskirts of Chicago. These have been meticulously modeled as well. The HO trains are all computer controlled. Now think about that for a second. Reliability is utterly critical. If all of these trains are going to go around and not run into each other and not derail and be operated all day long, run by nothing more than a computer executing a program. The computer keeps 20 trains moving all at the same time on 1,400 feet of track. Now you might say 1,400 feet of track does not make this one of the world's largest railroads. Okay, but it is also 3,500 square feet. It's just that very little of the railroad has track on it. Mostly it's structures and scenery, and that does qualify it as one of the world's largest HO scale railroads. The trains leave Chicago heading northwest, ostensibly to the Cascade Mountains, where they travel through some really beautiful scenery, very, very well modeled, and even through a mining district, which is really, really well done. Ultimately, the trains arrive here in Seattle. Okay, this is not a very accurate recreation of Seattle. It's meant to just sort of represent Seattle. But the waterfront district here is really, really detailed and really well done. In the port area, several container ships are being loaded and unloaded. If you haven't seen the cool video here on Toyman about the port of Los Angeles, do check that out and you'll see how this thing really is done. But the coolest part of this layout is Chicago, the massive, massive section of downtown Chicago which has been modeled here. Periodically, the railroad switches over to Chicago in its nighttime mode. Chicago is an entirely different city at night. I love it when people model their railroad for nighttime operation, and I love photographing model railroads after the shadows fall. If you've watched a lot of videos here on the channel, you will notice that I really enjoy creating nighttime scenes on model railroads. So it's really cool that this railroad switches over to night operations every half hour or so. Well, if this were the only thing here at the Museum of Science and Industry, it would be well worth coming in. But there are, in fact, 70 such exhibits here. Well, that is one hell of a museum.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Oh, my goodness.
And we didn't see...
We didn't get around to seeing maybe a third of it?
Maybe. I wouldn't even... The problem is you've missed so much stuff that then you
Right.
don't even know what you missed because you missed
Well, I
it.
know we missed the tornado thing in the middle. I was going to go down there and go see that, but
Well,
it was like then the train got my attention, and
Even though it's just this teeny surviving piece of the World's Fair, it's still 3 days to go through the whole thing because it's that big. So it's really just amazing. Just
It is.
absolutely amazing.
it is. For
So if
a
you
fact.
find your way to Chicago, you want to check out the Museum of Science and Industry because holy crap.
It's amazing.
Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, you want to subscribe. And if you haven't been over to the channel to watch the 150 other movies that are over there, you want to go over there and scope those out. All of these things can be done by clicking on the blue button, which is appearing just now. Doink, and it says subscribe, and that will take you to the channel, and it will make you a subscriber if you're not a subscriber. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here again in 1 week with, oh my heck, the most coolest collection of stuff, which is here in Chicago at the San Filippo home.
Oh
And you
my.
definitely want to see that.
Hang around for that one.
We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.